Ghostbusters is a franchise that is near and dear to so many people. If you grew up during the 1980s, there's a good chance you'd seen something related to the Ghostbusters. A comedy based in the sci-fi genre about three scientists, Peter Venkman, Egon Spengler, and Ray Stantz, along with a fourth member, hired gun Winston Zeddemore, all fighting ghosts with proton packs and ghost traps. It was released in 1984 to huge fanfare, spawning a brand new intellectual property that would go on to bring cartoons, toys, trading cards, comics, and most importantly, sequels. And most importantly, video game sequels. Ghostbusters on the NES was a dreadful experience in the eyes of many gamers, and when the movie sequel, Ghostbusters 2, came out 5 years after the original movie, the video game sequel to it wasn't so far off. In April 1990, just 2 years after the release of the first game on the NES, Ghostbusters 2 arrived courtesy of Activision and New Jersey-based developer Imagineering Inc. Does this one shine or slime? Well, let's hop in the Ecto-1 so I can take you on a personal cruise back to my childhood, which may surprise some of you. I'd like to consider myself an 80s kid. Sure, I was born in 1983, hit my teens in the mid to late 90s, but I still have really fond memories of being a kid in the 80s. I was obsessed with He-Man when I was 3 years old, then moved on to Ninja Turtles when those came out in the late 80s. I knew of franchises like Transformers and G.I. Joe, but I wasn't exposed to many 80s movies back then aside from Disney stuff. E.T. scared the crap out of me. My parents wouldn't let me watch stuff with mega violence in them, and somehow, Ghostbusters completely evaded me. I remember watching the Ghostbusters cartoon quite a bit, but honestly, my first real experience with Ghostbusters was this very game. I didn't watch the movie until one of my first dates with my now wife, back when we were first dating in 2009. Shortly after that, I saw the sequel, and, well, I don't know, the movies are okay. I wasn't blown away by them, if I'm gonna be honest. I can hear the downvotes and angry comments coming already. Prattle on, angry mob, I await your fiery judgment. Anyways, before we get into the review, I have to address the elephant in the room when reviewing a game like this. Yes, I'm talking about the classic Angry Video Game Nerds review on this one. There's a lot of similar points I could bring up that he's already addressed in his own memorable video. The weird Elvis lip snarls on Vigo the Carpathian, the fact that there's no pause button, which honestly is really inexcusable since the select button is left barren of responsibility, or the fact that the Ghostbusters control the Statue of Liberty with an NES advantage in a sort of ironic but potent showcase of how influential Nintendo really was back then. But there's a lot about this game that he didn't touch on, outside of my personal experience with Ghostbusters, and in this mini review, count on me to tear this one apart to get to the nitty-gritty weird details as per usual. Ghostbusters 2 on the NES attempts to retell the most basic, bare-bones aspects of the movie it's based on. By the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve, man's wickedness will be their downfall as Dracula rises from— oh, wait, wrong series. Sorry. Ghosts will rise up as the slime ascends, with the only hope being the Belmont family— okay, it's Ghostbusters. The big bad in this game, much like the movie, is Vigo the Carpathian, an entity stuck in a painting who is wreaking havoc on the city of New York. Somehow, this can all be avoided if people just think positively? Not the greatest explanation, but that's a whole different focus we won't get into. However, this got me thinking, is Ghostbusters 2 a Christmas movie? I mean, it takes place during a few months of lead up to New Year's Eve, so perhaps? I don't know, food for thought. 'Tis the season, am I right? Yeah, I know, I don't really do Christmas-based reviews. Much like a lot of licensed movie games, Ghostbusters 2 creates a parallel tie-in with the movies based on the levels themselves, telling the story through brief cutscenes and memorable locations from the movies. There's nothing wrong with this aspect. Heck, the Batman video games back then did the same thing. Now, there are definitely a few other Ghostbusters games that do a better job of staying faithful to the franchise, but honestly, Ghostbusters 2 keeps things simple. There's ghosts, you're Ghostbusters. You know the drill. Ghostbusters 2 features a grand total of 11 levels broken down between 3 different styles of gameplay. Though it's worth noting the manual states that the game levels are called scenes, and it doesn't consider the second Statue of Liberty level or the 4 separate treks through the museum as independent stages. So the game says there's 7 scenes. This is debatable in my opinion. I'll give the creators the benefit of the doubt regarding the final stage, since it doesn't technically end until all 4 Ghostbusters reach the end, but the Statue of Liberty stages wrap up just like all the other ones do, with a score tally. Most of the early levels bounce back and forth between a side-scrolling action stage, then a driving stage. This happens for 5 stages before the game switches out driving stages for the trek across the New York Harbor, which has 2 stages back to back. Then the game ends with the finale, with all 4 Ghostbusters playing a portion of the museum to independently reach Vigo the Carpathian's painting. Sliding down into the depths of the Van Horn subway, we take on our first level, playing as Ray Stans. Proton packs are equipped right off the bat, as our heroes... wait a second, exclusively use the slime blower from the second movie. Wait a minute! The thing is, all 4 characters in this game use the slime blower, despite the fact that in the movie, Winston Zeddemore and Ray Stans are the only members who use this new device. So why do the other 2 use the slime blowers in the game? Reasons? The controls go against the traditional grain of having A be the jump button and B fire weapons. In fact, it's reversed. It takes a bit of getting used to initially, but overall everything is pretty responsive here. Your slime shot is designed with an arcing system controlled by the directional pad's up and down movement, with left and right allowing for movement. Honestly, most of the time I just arced my shot upwards and called it a day. This game also has its side-scrolling levels starting from the right and moving left, which is again a style that goes against the standards of action games from back in the day. Mario, Sonic, Castlevania, Mega Man all had heroes moving generally from left to right. In these stages, or scenes as the manual calls them, you've got 3 styles of enemies: flying ghosts that look like Slimer, bouncing hazards, and time wasters, as I like to call them. Now the Slimers are easily dispatched with the arcing shot in most cases, but the hazard enemies travel by either sliding or bouncing across the stage. 99% of the time, you're going to die by the hands of these guys. They're typically inanimate objects like statue busts, steam whistle thingies, or fireworks? The time wasters, as I like to call them, are these little guys that rise and fall from the ceiling to the floor. Sometimes they come in wavy pattern styles, but either way, they are wasting your time. Much like the hazards or the giant versions of Slimers that will start appearing in the courtroom, they can only be killed with traps, which are laid with the start button. This will allow your Ghostbuster to capture the enemy before kicking the trap to the left or right by walking into it, but there's a few things to note. First, you can only have 1 trap on the screen at one time, so if you lay a trap and then kick it, you have to wait for it to get off the screen before laying another. One more thing to note is that the traps can hurt you if you try to jump over them after they've been dropped. So there's a bit of mental gymnastics that your hands and brain have to play to make sure you're not making dumb mistakes. So, why do I call the latter of the 3 time wasters? There's no time limit in this game, right? Actually, there is. Sorta. First off, ignore the clock on the heads-up display. That's mostly there for aesthetics and to signal a wrap-up of each level with a loud alarm. The driving levels have no time limit as your car is constantly moving, in addition to the Statue of Liberty sections, which are auto-scrolling. But the action side-scrolling levels have this spider that follows you throughout the level. If you stop to move and it catches you, it takes away one of your 4 chances. You can't jump over it either, so there's just a constant flow of movement to avoid the spider's grasp. The time wasters aim to slow you down by killing them, so the spider can catch up. I like the balance of having to keep going to avoid the spider, but this generally doesn't affect when I play the game because it's easy to get into a rhythm of shoot, move, trap, move, rinse, lather, repeat. Playing through the second of these levels in between driving missions, you'll move on to Winston Zeddemore in the courthouse, followed by another driving mission before wrapping up with Egon Spengler in the other subway. Now, I bet you're wondering, hey, what about Peter Venkman? You only play as Venkman if you get through the final stage with the other 3 Ghostbusters. Well, that kinda gyps any Peter Venkman fans. You play as all the Ghostbusters twice, but only play as Venkman once? What a rip. This got me thinking, which Ghostbuster would I be? Well, I am pretty snarky, so maybe Venkman. But in reality, I'd probably just be a Slimer. We're both fat, we love food, and are covered in slime. Hey, don't you judge me, I am who I am! The driving missions move from left to right, instead of what we've been used to this entire game with right to left action levels. In fact, it even switches back to right to left when you're playing through the Statue of Liberty sections. Because the car is always moving, there's little one can do to manipulate anything other than speed and where you want to put the car. Pressing left slows the car down, and pressing forward speeds it up. Up and down, of course, change lanes. Jumping is again controlled with the B button, and the A button shoots slime. Power-ups are hidden in really odd places. You can shoot the manhole covers to try to get a Ghostbusters logo icon. There's also these big floating slimes which you have to target just right in order to kill them. Your car shoots a single shot forward and an arced shot as well, and if the slime is popped, you'll either get a temporary shield or an upgraded slime shot. This can be done twice, with the first upgrade being a faster, more purple colored attack, and the second being a more wavy, long-distance orange shot. It's a shame this doesn't also carry over to the action scenes, but whatever shot you end the driving level with, it carries over to the next one. There's also these weird clear screen bursts, which you can kinda accidentally trigger randomly, clearing the screen of enemies. Most baddies here are just Slimers or generic ghosts that shoot slime. Probably the number one thing that will frustrate gamers in this game is the driving stage pitfalls. Throughout these levels, there are pitfalls scattered around the stage, and in order to pass them, you have to hit the purple arrow to trigger a speed boost, then jump over the pit. However, the arrow moves down the screen as time goes on, which can lead to unintentional loss of life if the arrow drops right as you're attempting to grab it. Double pits are back to back, again requiring quick thinking to avoid dying. When falling down a pit, you have to start the stage over again, along with the loss of a chance. Run out of chances, and it's game over. You'll have 3 continues before you get a final game over. Normally, I'd say this seems a bit extreme, but the game does give the opportunity to gain 1-ups. You might think score has something to do with that, and well, no, it doesn't. Turns out you have to collect 20 of these Ghostbuster icons to gain an extra life. But these things are scattered everywhere in all the stages, flying about, begging to be shot at with the proton pack or the slime cannon in order to stack up lives. In fact, the best opportunity to start building up a ton of extra lives is in the Statue of Liberty section of the game. So after bouncing back and forth between action and driving stages, all 4 Ghostbusters are reunited inside the Statue of Liberty to reenact the scene from the movie. The Statue of Liberty, controlled ironically enough by the NES Advantage controller in the flick, plods through the water, shooting at ghosts flying in erratic and really goofy patterns. Shooting the torch allows the up and down arrows to arc the shot forwards or backwards, however getting hit loses this ability. Thankfully it reappears pretty quickly, so being quick on the draw is essential. There's also a screen clear feature which can be used with the B button, but once used, you'll have to wait for this flying green book to arrive so you can attack it and get the ability again. There's also certain ghosts that can give you invulnerability for a short time, and utilizing all 3 of these items mentioned will easily get you through these 2 Statue of Liberty sections. The hardest part is probably the second of these levels, as there are clouds that shoot lightning. These can also appear invisible, making them really hard to target, but using the clear screen feature makes quick work of these enemies. Plus, there's bonus sections that offer a ton of Ghostbusters icons. I was able to easily save up 7 lives to use in the final level, and trust me, you're going to need them. Once arriving at the slime-covered museum, each Ghostbuster has to go through the stage one at a time, where they will eventually team up to defeat Vigo. The first 3 are difficult, but not impossible. The last one, where you play as Bill Murray's Peter Venkman, is so brutally hard, mostly because of the onslaught of ground enemies that appear. I can't tell you how many times I would lose all my lives on this stage. See, most of this game requires strict memorization and repeated playthroughs, and I'm fine with that. Plenty of old school NES games are like this. I think the issue I have with this last level is the patterns here are way too erratic. There's nowhere to dodge some of these attacks, making me take hit after hit until I got lucky and cleared the level. The ending is pretty weak, but I wasn't expecting much for a licensed NES game if I'm to be honest. When it comes to graphics, the game isn't anything special on the NES. Most of the ghosts are super corny looking. The game runs perfectly fine with no hiccups of slowdown or issues with unresponsive controls. Though I will say the Statue of Liberty sections felt a little agonizing as the levels are so long compared to the rest of the game's sections. There's a good use of slimy greens and reds, slate grays, and bright yellows, but overall, Ghostbusters is just an average looking game. Comparatively, the music is, on the whole, pretty average. There's a severe lack of New Jack Swing, which was present in the movie, as well as HAL Laboratory's new Ghostbusters 2 game, which had a much more groovin' soundtrack on the NES. There's a decent rendition of Higher and Higher during the Statue of Liberty sections, and the Ghostbusters Ray Parker Jr. theme is fun to listen to, despite it being featured way too prominently. There's also a few eerie tracks that caught my ear, and I remember being really creeped out when getting a game over. Heck, there's even a rendition of Auld Lang Syne, which has been arranged by this game's composer, Mark Van Heck. Yep, good old Mark Van Heck, composer of such NES classics such as... Okay, who am I kidding? Most of his work I'm not a fan of. His compositions generally come across as very flat sounding, but here, I mostly enjoy the music, but I'm gonna be honest, it's largely for nostalgic purposes. Ghostbusters 2 on the NES was my first Ghostbusters related entertainment, so I have an odd case of nostalgia for it. I'm not entirely sure why my parents got me this one back in the day. I mean, they knew I hadn't seen the movies. I'd imagine when they got this for me as a Hanukkah gift one year, it was recommended by someone at the store. Though the HAL Laboratories game is a much better NES Ghostbusters offering, one which never came to North America, I cut my teeth on games like Ghostbusters 2. Somehow, the suffering made me a better video game player. The challenge is mostly skill-based, with quick reflexes being needed to avoid dive-bombing Slimers and bouncing statue heads. I'd say overall, the game gives you everything you need to succeed at defeating it, outside of that final stage, which requires sacrificial luck over sufficient skills. The game is pretty short by design, with the amount of time needed to master it being a couple hours at the minimum. It's not the worst licensed game on the NES by a long shot. In fact, it's one of the better games that Imagineering Inc. has developed. Plus, there's a 2-player mode, so if you want to rope a buddy along, you two can die together. Maybe you'll come back as ghosts that do silly, swirly dances. One can only hope. In conclusion, bustin' Ghostbusters 2 on the NES makes me feel, just okay. Thanks to all Patreon members, but especially the Morningstar Whip tier and up. They are Bryce, Nintenjo, Venthros, Technicolor Dojo, Sam Schaefer, Scott McElhone, Trevin Adams, and Derek Demitter. Your support really helps with each and every review. If anyone is watching this and wants to help, feel free to join in the link below. For those who want to help in other ways, sharing the review on your social media really means a lot, as my channel has and always will be sponsored by viewers like you. Thanks for watching. Want more Dude You Haven't Played This Game? Check out the videos on the screen. Or head to my channel and grab the full playlist of reviews and retrospectives. I'll see you on the next Dude You Haven't Played This Game.